What up, Leather fam? Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things mental health and all things spooky.
My name is Mark.
And I am Josh.
And we have with us today Scott the Miniature Maniac and Ninjon themselves, co-hosts of Also Trapped Under Plastic.
Yeah, and if you didn't hear me saying it the first time and then the second time, my name is Scott. I did not listen to the brief very well. John was better. Sorry.
It happens. We're going to be discussing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003 tonight. Gentlemen, how's everyone feeling tonight?
Murdery.
Murdery. I'm feeling like toesies on a piano. That's what I'm feeling. Did you not watch that movie, Scott?
No. I don't know if I want to know what that means.
Well, right. Let's dig into this. This movie came at kind of like a very pivotal time for the slasher genre. And John, this was actually your pick for the film. Can you kind of like walk us through what the slasher genre looks like at the time of this Platinum Dunes reinvention?
Yeah, so when this film came out, and the reason I picked it is because it has a bit of nostalgia for me. I was in college at the time, and the horror movies that were being made at that time was a lot of like, was it like Freddy versus Jason, and then like Jason in space, and it was just kind of just gotten too far jumping the shark. And then this sucker comes in, and it has so much grit and so much macabre. It's my favorite kind of like, the scariest things are the scariest real people in this world. And this film is just like, oh yeah, I don't ever want to go to a rural area ever again in my life.
You never want to go see Leonard Skinner either.
That's one thing we got in common.
Skinner.
No, that's absolutely one thing that I truly love about this film is that when you look at the original 1974 film, it has this like level of griminess to it, and you feel dirty after you watch it. And this film is like that on steroids because you feel gross for completely different reasons.
Yeah, it's and it hits you right from the get-go of him, the police officer walking down the stairs, and you see the tears in the wall from fingernails and the matted up wet hair, and it's just like, oh, don't go down there. It's like, no, it's real.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
all right.
I got to see it opening night in the theater.
Shut up.
It was interesting because it's Michael Bay before he really established his special effects reputation.
That makes so much sense.
It makes more sense now as to why it was the way it was.
Yeah.
But at an age now when everything is like a remake or a reboot, they all tend to fall short. And with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it took kind of everything the original did and made it grimier and nastier and more visceral, because the original, you remember it as this like horror fest with blood and stuff, but then when you watch it, there was like no blood in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a mind game from the way they presented everything. And then this one just took it as like, you know what, we remember it that way, so that's how we're remaking it.
Yeah, it's like if you wrote down a month after you saw the original, you went in and wrote down what you thought you saw, and then this one they just let you see it.
Yeah, I really dove deep into that massacre effect. And I think for, when you look at the landscape of slashers in general, we all look to Halloween as being the one that kind of kicked it off and did everything. And that's not necessarily the case, because Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw predates it by about 4 years. But Halloween was kind of the one that put it on the map. And I think that John, when you're talking about kind of where we were as far as climate, like Scream 3 had kind of like become a mockery of the very things it set out to do in 96. And it was just like this very weird, dry law where you're sending slashers to space and then doing Freddy versus Jason. And then you needed like a hard reset for the genre, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre just did that in spades, because this movie just holds nothing back.
So Scott, you've never seen this movie before, right? Before this viewing?
I watched it and then realized that I had seen it before, but many, many years ago.
Okay. And you're just a wee lad.
Yeah. No, it was just just a little boy watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre by my mom. Yeah, that was
I
me.
just picture you as the little boy in the movie. You know, that's you. It is kind of a spitting
with
image.
the fucking teeth.
Yeah.
Crawling around.
Come on, come here, quick, get away.
I'll take that, because he was like the only redeemable character of the entire movie. So yeah, I'll take that.
He had a shred of morality to him.
Yeah, he did. All right. So what's the format for talking about a movie? When can I start shitting on this movie?
It's so, I think it's ironic that like the camera has positioned itself the way that it has, because I feel like John and I are going to be very much like defenders of this movie and possibly franchise, and then you and Mark are opposite ends. And so I guess like let's go around and kind of like share our experience, or like where we stand when it comes to like the franchise as a whole, because this is a very convoluted, messy franchise. Scott, you can go first.
I'd love to. Okay,
Shit
so
all you want.
Okay, so I've seen the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What I remember about it was that it was a psychological horror, like the camera angles, the focal lengths used, the edit. There's a particular scene that I remember where I believe the main surviving female, or like the main actress, is in the house, and they have the camera on just a rotating platform with a wide angle, almost fisheye lens. It's going around, and you see every face of the family like laughing into the camera. That scene has stuck with me since I watched it probably like a decade ago. So that was really impactful. So I remember that about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so when you watch this one has less of that psychological horror and more of a physiological horror, more blood, like you guys said. And I will say that what you guys mentioned about the time period that the movie came out in did make me appreciate more what it was trying to do, because I'm looking at it through this lens where, you know, I've been watching horror for, you know, I don't know, several years, but we have like a status quo that we're familiar with right now in 2021. So watching this from 2003 right now, you kind of have a different opinion, whereas if you were watching it, you know, back in 2003, you might have a more appreciative opinion of it. But when I was watching it, I was just so overwhelmed by how stupid all the characters were, and how they just made the dumbest choices at every single possible avenue. So that kind of took me out of it a little bit. It's just like, oh, a creepy house that a little boy is jumping around in. Let's go inside of it and delve further. It's like, oh, my boyfriend disappeared inside this other creepy house. I'm gonna go searching around. And it's just like, it was so laughable at so many points that it's just kind of like, okay, come on, like what are we doing here? So those were kind of a little bit of the problems that I was experiencing while watching.
I mean, it did set up for a good take on seeing Jessica Biel's ass the entire movie. Because like, every time they showed her, it was like death set her ass shot.
Oh, they over sexualized
and everything's getting wet.
Yeah. And then like you have her in the freezer, and so like obviously your nipples are just gonna go boing, and so like every chance they got to sexualize this woman, they took it.
Yes.
Well, when you think about it, she was coming out of being on years of seventh heaven, and part of her contract was she wasn't allowed to do stuff like this. That's why she kind of did a handful of movies after she left that was like this, is because she wasn't allowed to due to contract restraints and restrictions on seventh heaven.
Is that a fact,
dude?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, because she did a magazine shoot close to the end of her run and got in trouble for it because of the way her contract was done.
I don't know. Like I can appreciate that, but like for me, like I don't necessarily need the final girl to be like just overly sexualized the entire time that I'm seeing her, because I'm here truthfully, like the reason I keep coming back to this and that I'm a defender of this film is because like I like the brutality I like this version of Leatherface, and I also think that there are characters that make this film equally tense without even the bloodshed, and the sheriff's a great example about that. But I just felt like that was such a shoehorned in extra thing that was like a precursor to what Michael Bay would end up doing with Megan Fox in Transformers a few years later.
Yeah, and
Good connection.
I don't dislike the movie like Scott appears to. I don't think it's great. It was a good remake. But then when you look at remakes like the original 1980 Thing, when you look at the Evil Dead remake, they were so much better remakes because of the way it was handled. Where this was almost, we're going to take the original movie, reshoot it, add a whole ton of cussing and a lot of violence and blood, because they didn't in the original. Psycho, I think, had the remake with Vince Vaughn come out right around the same time, and it was almost a shot-for-shot remake. And it just, to me, that's one of the holdbacks on Chainsaw Massacre. This one was that it was almost, it had its differences, but it was almost just, okay, we're going to take the original and just throw a whole lot of blood at it.
I will say, though, going back to a point we made earlier, was that this was 2003, and you look at the years the Evil Dead remake was made, and the thing was like lit, what, 2011, 2012?
Yeah, 2011.
Yeah, so, we were talking about a decade later. I think putting it back into context of what was the slasher genre, in fact, what even were horror movies, and they were at a point in this time where it was kind of comically done, and I don't think that it leaned into it hard, and like Michael Bay does, but I think it leaned into it in a way that there was a certain amount of staying true to the original, just from the aesthetic. I think like the way that the coloration was done throughout the film, it was all shot in a very desaturated, cold, like very almost monochromatic. It was like they took the 74 footage and it was put through like a 1980s filter. Like even the blood, you say there's a lot of blood in it, but if you go back and watch it, only when light hits it a certain way is it actually red. It's almost always black or dark brown. And that just like helped me feel like the grime was really like ever surrounding, and everything was always damp. I'm like, God, everything's wet, and you just feel swampy knowing they're in Texas. And it was just, I mean, it was uncomfortable the whole way. Now, Scott, you mentioned that the kids were dumb. And in fact, like not that, how many years ago was it where there was a commercial that was felt like it was a direct spoof off of this, where the kids run into a shed filled with like hanging chainsaws and axes and stuff. Let's hide in the shed.
I love that commercial.
Yeah, Geico, great.
But let's backtrack the steps, and like tell me where, like, you're a logical person. Bad situation happens. Like, tell me where the step was where you're like, that's dumb. Okay, so you're driving with your pinata full of weed from Mexico.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you the exact moment.
Okay.
So they stop. So someone shoots their head in the back of their van, right?
Yeah.
They are asked to go to an abandoned mill to meet the sheriff there.
Well, they didn't say it was abandoned. They said to go to the mill. That's where he's
the
gonna
old
be.
mill. You're right. The old mill.
Right.
They're hanging out at the old mill. There's this fucking shed with baby doll heads nailed to the outside, and they're like, let's sit in front of this casually and not mention a thing about any of the set dressing on this building. And then let's go inside of it when we hear a creepy ass sound. If I heard a creepy ass sound, I would have jettisoned myself from that situation immediately. I'd be like, fuck this chick. She's going in the ditch. We're leaving. We're going to go see Skinnerd. Immediately. No, they're like, let's go inside this creepy ass factory and see what made the sound. It's like, bro, come on. That point.
I mean, it's kind of like there was a movie I laugh about that's on Shudder called The Shed. There's a vampire stuck in a shed that this kid is like feeding people to, and they don't know how to get rid of him. And I'm like, you've already said the shed's full of gasoline. Flick a couple matches on that shed, job done. This whole movie could have ended if they had just gone, I'm sorry, you're a crazy chick, we ain't stopping, and just kept going, and that would have been it.
Sure. I wish The Shed would have been a short film. That movie's terrible. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't.
Hey.
Again, like John's saying, when it came out, though, a lot of the horror that was coming out was just campy, comedic. There was nothing much. The other things coming around the same time was a lot of the Asian remakes, like The Grudge. And
they were. Well, yeah. The Ring kicked it off, but it was kind of The Grudge that really brought it into the mainstream.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the other kind of horror that was coming out. Was a lot of those. A handful of those coming out at the same time. You had the Screams, like you said, that were kind of starting to make fun of themselves. And then you had this come out that was a remake, but it was violent. It was serious. It was everything it needed to be at the time that it came out. Whether you thought the kids were idiots or not, because I don't think they made a single good decision in that entire movie. But it was what needed to come out, I think, for horror to turn into what we have now.
Yeah.
Because shortly thereafter, you had the Rob Zombie Halloween come out, which we actually did a whole episode on, comparing the original to the remake, because I like the Rob Zombie one better than the remake.
Patreon.com/victims and villains.
So it kind of paved the way for almost a reinvention or reimagining of horror to bring it into what you have now.
Yeah. Okay, here's the last bit of shitting that I'm going to do. And I'm going to say a good thing about the movie, because there are good things about this movie, 100%. I looked up horror movies that came out in 2000, and we have the first Saw. We have... there's more. We have Wreck, which is amazing. Eden Lake is amazing. And there are many other very good. Splinter.
When was Blair Witch Project? Was that 99?
99, yeah.
I think I was a senior in high school when that came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the old bastard of the room.
Yeah. I was a junior, if it makes you feel better. I remember seeing that in the theater, and I'd never been more scared in my life leaving a movie theater than that movie. Oh, but yeah.
28 days later.
Why I asked Blair Witch Project, Scott, was because Blair Witch Project and Saw, those are, I mean, they are kind of more true to the traditional Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's as much about psychological, just mind games through the whole way. And then there's especially in Saw, obviously there's some gore, but it's more of just the roller coaster of tension that just keeps clicking up and up and up.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think those movies probably are more influential for what happened in the next 10 to 20 years or 10 years in horror films. But I think this one also did a lot in terms of kind of creating an area in the middle where you can have more psychological, where this is kind of just, like a dumb teenage kids version, and adding the psychological part to it. So,
yeah. Blair Witch is a great movie. The one thing about this one that I really liked, though, was R. Lee, his performance. So this guy is a drill sergeant in the military, or he used to be, rather. And you probably remember his performances from Full Metal Jacket and Apocalypse Now,
yeah,
where he was playing a drill sergeant. But in this, he's playing a cop a sheriff, and he does an amazing job at being just totally devoid of any kind of morality while not seeming like he thinks anything's wrong with him. Right. And it was so like when they're investigating the body in the back seat and they're like taping her up, like he does foul things that I don't even want to repeat, and it's just like holy shit. It feels like you guys mentioned grime. That was the grimiest moment of that movie for me. So that his performance, he was fantastic in that scene where he has all the kids laying on the ground outside the truck and he's like taping them up and stuff. Like that was intense.
I've never seen somebody with saran wrap be so nonchalant.
Yeah, his performance in particular always makes me feel like really uncomfortable watching those movies. Like the scene in particular that you're referring to with him and Morgan in the van, where he's got to reenact the crime scene. Like, not only does this guy just watch someone commit suicide right in front of his face, but he's also had to help move the body, and now he's got to recreate the very crime scene that is traumatized him for the past few hours. And the fact that the actor who plays him, like the character just doesn't give anything, and then you have that reveal later on in the film that he's like attached to the Hewitt family, like it just it's like another kind of griminess that this film does really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was something that it took me a couple watch throughs of this movie to catch, and I remembered it when I watched it again the other day, was when the murder weapon, the snub-nosed pistol, he puts it in his sock holster. At first, when I remember watching this on like VHS, you can't really see it very clearly, but it's actually a sock holster, meaning that's the holster that gun was supposed to be in. Mm-hmm. And you catch that, but the kids don't catch that. It was his pistol.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, you just said you didn't catch it either till later.
No, I didn't.
I've seen this movie a dozen times and I've never noticed that.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, he takes the gun and sticks it in his holster and snaps it shut, and it's the holster for that gun.
Yeah. And that's very early on, them first meeting him. So it's like a little bit of a window. If you catch that, you're like, oh no. But one of the reasons I like him the most is they ramp him up as a character. Because you think of this situation, if you're out there, you want to do what's right. You want to be like, look, we should call the police. We should wait by, yes, creepy place, said he's going to show up. He shows up. And he doesn't like go full bat shit crazy right away. Like, he's just kind of there, and it gets more and more intense. And then before you know it, like, oh, this whole thing is bad. There's no, and this is what I think the movie does so well, is there is no place to run where you're not more screwed than where you just ran from. It's like everything is against you out here, and it's just, ooh.
Yeah, even the end where Jessica Biel thinks that she's escaped and gets into the truck, only to find that she passes the same exact barbecue place to come right back to the Hewitt family.
Yeah,
like this small town is, I guess, again, like it doesn't. This one's not as articulate with its psychological horror, but the last act, I feel like, does a lot better job with the psychological nature than the previous two acts.
I feel like Jessica Biel in the last act could have gotten away a whole lot easier if she learned not to scream at her own shadow. I mean, she really could have. She let him know. She'd have been better off going, "Hey guys, I'm over here." Because every time she turned a corner, like in the slaughterhouse, she's screaming at everything.
Yeah.
But then again, I've never been a hysterical teenage girl, so.
Right.
You don't know what it's like.
She did come up with a smart idea when it counted, though.
Yeah, the cleaver.
Yeah, with the pig in the other locker. That was that was tricky. I did not see that coming the first time. That was good. And you're so used to them being nothing but feeling helpless through this whole thing. And I will say this: they obviously made her sexualized through this whole film, but she was in a more subdued way. She was the badass of the movie, and she eventually was like, I'm just not going to do what the girl that they picked up did and just give up. Like eventually she grit her teeth. She goes back for that baby because she knows she has to. And she's not going to go without a fight. And then she runs the sheriff over like 6 times, screaming the whole time. It's like, okay, all right, you're a little bit, you've lost a little bit of your sanity here, but you're kind of a badass. So it was kind of nice that this film, you assume football playing boyfriend guy, driver, is going to be the one that's going to get him through it. Or he's going to at least make it most of the way and be the one so they don't all get killed right away. And he immediately gets smashed in the head with a shovel, like 10 minutes into the movie. And you're like, oh, crap. Now what do we do? That guy's supposed to be the one that's going to make it, right? And so who ends up being the hero is, it wasn't who you would expect with this trope of a film. I guess Jamie Lee Curtis does that too, so...
Yeah, I think a girl surviving all the way to the end of a horror movie is such a trope that there is a movie called The Final Girls, which is all about girls surviving until the end of horror movies. But
it's usually despite themselves.
I mean, yeah, it's true. Not because of their abilities. I feel you there. I feel you there.
Yeah, she survived as the strong lead, the strong female role, which there wasn't really a lot of at that time, I don't think, in general. In horror.
2003?
Yeah. Not a lot of. There may have been a couple. Jamie Lee Curtis, I think more in the second Halloween than the first one.
Yeah. You can't forget, of course, this is way before, but Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, God, I'm about to be an idiot to forget that one. Yeah, Sigourney Weaver was one of my Hollywood crushes forever when I was a kid. So
she's a true badass.
She always was. It still is.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think to a degree though that horror experienced a dry spell of those strong female archetypes until probably the early 2000s when we get into this wave of art house cinema that horror has been kind of experiencing with Ari Aster and the A24s and stuff along those lines.
Yeah, because we started getting the A24s put out quite a few of them.
Yeah.
You got Lamb getting ready to come out. You had Midsommar. You had Toni Collette in Hereditary.
The Witch.
Anya Taylor. I can't remember.
Joy.
Yeah, her. In The Witch. So yeah, it's becoming more common, but at the time it wasn't as common as it is now.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Scott, what else do you love about this movie?
There was a really cool shot where the camera was in the back of the van and it backed up through the gun wound in her head.
Oh yeah,
and went out the back window. Yeah. So I watched that and I was like, I don't know how they did that. There might have been a stitch somewhere in the middle of the shot where it stopped and then began, but that was 2003, so I don't know. That was a really cool shot that I liked a lot. And honestly, just talking about some of the elements of the film and how other people interpreted it is making me appreciate it in different ways. So that's good too.
Well, I love that shot particularly, but before we experience that tragedy, there is a kind of a change up that we experience really early in this film. If you've seen the original 74 version, you know that the hitchhiker that we meet originally is one of the family. And in this one, it's actually a victim who's escaped the family. How did you guys kind of feel about the change up to that one?
You're right.
The first time I saw it, I'm like, they did a really good job knowing that, and then actually showing the short-haired like girl that had the baby in the trailer.
Yeah,
they had done the makeup and the color, the color of their face and like everything. It felt very similar, like it almost could have been part of the family. And I had expected it to be such. There, but I think it was kind of letting you know as an audience the beginning of the movie what you expect to see because you love the original, that it's not all going to be the same. And so I appreciated that, is if you knew the original, you loved the original, they're like, oh, they're gonna not just make this with new technology. So I appreciated that.
So it's almost like a nod to the original. Like you said, she does look like she could fit in with the family.
Mm-hmm.
But it's enough of a change to make it stand out subtly. And it's not something that becomes apparent, I don't think, until they start finding like her picture and stuff in the back of the trunk of the old car. Is when they start kind of realizing, oh, it's that chick and she's not from here. Kind of thing, but it could have been, which would have made it play more to the original, even though they changed it a little. Yeah,
that's a part, Mark. Okay, when Scott was saying that right away they did the dumb thing, I don't agree with that. I would say, a logical person, when I find a picture of the person that just killed themselves with their family, pickled in a glass jar in the trunk of a rusted out, broken down car in the middle of a field, that's when I say,
it's time
we're
to
getting
go
the F
home.
out of here.
Why was the picture in a jar of like liquid? What was the deal there? Is that some kind of ritual?
I don't know.
That's how you keep everything safe.
Yeah,
everything
moonshine, bro.
I mean, didn't they have like a jar full of teeth too?
Oh yeah, teeth, eyeballs.
Yeah,
they had one of my favorite, like, just panning shots is down in the basement. There's a clarinet case, and there's a clarinet in the case taken apart because the clarinet can break into 3 pieces, and this nice little velvet inside of the case, and the top of the case is folded open, and there's pinned fingers all the way across.
Yes.
Severed fingers on the top of the clarinet case. It's not the fingers that I love. It's the fingers in a clarinet case that make it come. That's what I love.
So,
that's the attention to detail right there.
So here's Leatherface was based on Ed Gein.
Yeah.
Who made like clothing out of skin, a belt out of nipples, a lampshade. So some of that, not only just like his leather face, but some of the stuff you see, like you're talking about the clarinet case, is all aspects kind of a nod to tribute to taken from Ed Gein and some of the crap they found in his house.
Dahmer had human skin lampshades on his bed too. But I don't know if he was, I guess I need to look more into that, if he was influenced by Gein or if that was just, we're from Wisconsin, so.
Yeah, Gein's probably one of the first, outside of like Jack the Ripper, but one of the first really well-known serial killers. And the issue with him was that he was on the unintelligent side of the IQ level. And he's one I've read up on for a while, and he's a victim of circumstance that he didn't really know what he was doing was wrong. And once they got him out of it and started learning more about him, he was just like the nicest person. He helped clean the psych ward, and they said he was one of the most helpful inmates they ever had until he finally died in the psych ward.
I wouldn't like invite him to my Halloween party or anything, but
I mean,
where's Bobby?
I think that scene in particular that you're talking about, one of my favorite scenes and from the original 74 is the scene where you have one of the girls and she trips over this room and it's just filled with bones and like chicken feathers. It's such a grotesque scene, and I feel like the panning shots that we get to see in this film are perfect homages to that. I think the scene that you're talking about in particular, John, where you get to see the attention to detail with the fingers and the teeth, like it's such a great uncomfortableness that it really seeks in and crawls underneath your skin. And there's a couple scenes in particular where they get to the baby doll place, the old mill, and you kind of get those panning shots and you just see things like scooters and clothes, shoes. You kind of get to see like this is where he takes the victims, and the clarinet is kind of where it's like final.
Those are the trophies.
Yeah.
So something I don't remember in the original, did they give any indication why Leatherface was the way he was?
No. Leatherface is more sympathetic in the original one. There are legitimate scenes of him like weeping and kind of being confused, and Gunnar Hansen's gone on record saying that like he interpreted the character as kind of being someone that was not greatly educated. And so I think to a degree you get a little bit of that in with this Leatherface, but this Leatherface is just a juggernaut.
Well, the reason I ask is because in this one they talk about him having a skin disease and everybody picked on him and things like that. And they show him at one point with his mask off and he has like no nose and his skin's all jacked up and stuff. And I don't remember them talking about anything like that in the original.
Also, they made a prequel to this movie called The Beginning. 3 years later.
The Beginning.
It was okay. It was kind of more of the same.
Yeah. It was basically a reboot of the remake.
Yeah. What was it? Jordana Brewster, I think, was in it.
Yeah.
It was right. It wasn't too long after she was kind of got known in the original Fast and Furious.
Yeah, it was 2 years after the second Fast.
Yeah.
There was a moment in this film that I thought it was going to go one way and it went the other. So you know that the main boyfriend who dies first gets his face skinned and then Leatherface wears it. Jessica Biel's character found someone sitting in a tub in the house, and it was Morgan. But I thought for sure it was going to be her boyfriend, who is still alive but just faceless. And I was like, I was mentally prepared for that kind of just gore, because this movie was just so intense kind of leading up to that point.
So, and they show him, what was his name? Morgan, I think was his name, in the bathtub, and you see the hole in his back from the meat hook. And you've got the other friend that's hanging on a meat hook. Okay. Now, looking at where that hook went, I have had collapsed lungs. I can tell you, you do not have that much energy, and you do not talk like that. So, from a person, granted, I haven't been meat hooked, but I have had collapsed lungs, and it's painful to even breathe and talk, and they're all like, oh, and running around and stuff. So,
if there's one
kind of.
if there's one thing that Scott has taught us in this episode, is that you really have to disband your belief for this movie.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be that energetic after hanging like that.
But I mean, the reveal of Kemper's face, like when he like looks at her in the headlights, and you just see the face, that is one of the greatest moments in this movie.
Yes.
It's the perfect amount of it's him, but you know, like it takes a bit to really gather like what a face would look like sewn up and stretched out and everything. It doesn't just like, oh, it doesn't look like you just popped it on there, but it still is recognizable as him just enough. Yeah, that's where she's like, he turns and looks at her, and I'm just like, you better run.
Yeah, goosebumps. and you also, too, you look at the way that they light the masks for the majority of the film, and the majority of the film outside of that particular shot, you don't ever really see his eyes. Like, there's always a blackness to him, but for that particular scene, they made sure that you got to see his eyes.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the Leatherface scenes that stands out the most in that movie, is when he turns around with Kemper's face. You know it's coming because you see him sewing the mask together at one point, but you don't expect it to be that kind of a reveal in this dark, gritty, nightlight lit movie where suddenly it's headlights on his face and you see him full face and it's Kemper stretched out over a giant.
One thing I noticed that they did more of as the movie went on. Probably the first shot like this doesn't happen for the first 30 minutes of the movie, but once the movie starts to get really tense, they start using more and more of the extreme close-up to the victim. So one of the teenagers, right? Like you see it a lot when shit hits the fan in the house for the first time with the old dude with no legs. And it's like her looking at something really close, and the camera is right on her face. So you just want to see around her. You want to see behind her. And you just can't. And then something happens. And then every time it gets to a point where it's predictable, but every time it gets closer and closer when you know something's about to happen, and you're just like, just let me see. I know something bad's going to happen, and then it happens. So I liked it as they built it up because the movie starts off, doesn't feel that way, and then suddenly it gets claustrophobic on you when all the tension starts to rise.
Yeah, and a lot of the scenes where she's hiding or things happen seem to be smaller and smaller and smaller sets. Like she's hiding in like a closet while her buddy gets cut in half hanging from a chandelier in an old raggedy cabin. And it seems to get, thinking about it, you're right. It does kind of seem to get smaller and tighter spaces to where she's in a locker at one point, closer to the end of the movie.
And you're trying to see what she can see, whether it's looking through that peephole to see if Leatherface is in that cabin with them when they're both hiding, or in the locker. And that's kind of a traditional shot in a lot of traditional slashers, but they often do it a lot more. In this movie, they don't do it consistently because they have all these things they want you to show in the atmosphere, but then when they just suck it in on you and then they go back out. I like how it does that, and it doesn't stay close right behind the main characters all the time. When I think of even stuff like Psycho and the original Halloween, they do that, I feel, so much because maybe you have less tools at your disposal to create that fear. But this, I kind of enjoyed that it didn't overuse it. You get to a point later when she's in that cabin where I think it was a little bit too much, but I enjoyed how they just sucked you in the very first time. It was really uncomfortable.
I have a question for you guys.
Go for it.
What are your thoughts on jump scares get a lot of hate in the horror genre world, and I feel like this movie had its fair share of jump scares. So I'm curious. I mean, like, jump scares are almost a thing to the point where there are like types of jump scares now. So I'm kind of curious what your guys' thoughts are on this movie's usage of them to create fear.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
I feel like jump scares are one of those, like, you have to experience it for the first time. But if you've seen the movie over and over again, the way that I have for this particular one, I think it uses it smartly. It gets to a point where it becomes a little bit redundant in certain scenes, but like it doesn't. I can't ever take back the first time that this movie like truly terrified me with those jump scares.
Okay.
I don't think jump scares, I think, kind of have a bad rap. I think it depends on the movie and circumstance. You have a lot of horror coming out that just, and have for a while, that it's become the go-to thing where it relies on the jump scare as opposed to your story and your characters and what's going on. It's, okay, we have a slightly creepy story. Oh, dude's going to jump around a corner. Oh, somebody's going to fall out of the ceiling. And that's the kind of jump scare that people hate, is when the movie relies on it heavily as opposed to it just being a natural progression of the story and it happening naturally as opposed to being forced.
I think that's the artsy fartsy folks trying to poo-poo on the hand that feeds them. Because truthfully, if there's no history in horror movies of jump scares, it's not a genre that these artsy films could exist in. Because if you didn't have Nightmare on Elm Street, if you didn't have Friday the 13th, if you didn't have Chucky, if you didn't have these pillars that made people spend millions and millions of dollars at the box office to make this genre popular, which was on the back of jump scares, then I don't think it can grow enough and evolve into different ways. The psychological thriller is kind of closer to a lot of what I consider really like newer horror movies. Mm. To me, they're closer to I forgot how to say that word, psychological thriller, than they are to a true horror genre. But now there's a spectrum. I feel like if I'm going to be truly terrified in the moment of a thing, when it kicks the door down, like somebody talking through me with a creepy voice on the other side of this door is kind of scary, but a guy kicking down my door with a chainsaw going is going to scare me way more right now. So I'm okay with that.
But at the same time, like with Leatherface, it's fitting. It's the character, it's the story, it's how it is. But then you end up with something like, what was it called? Oh, I can't remember the name of the movie. It came out a year or two ago around Halloween. You downloaded an app, and it told you how long you had to live before it killed you. It was like Countdown or something like that. It relied more on the jump scare than story and characters. And that's what I'm talking about. That kind of horror that just kind of dime a dozen. They throw them out. Oh, here's a bunch of jump scares. Okay. And you forget about it. But then you have like psychological thrillers like Silence of the Lambs, which still may not fall into the category for some people of horror, but it's classified as horror. Just about anybody you talk to, it's classified as horror, except for Josh over there.
Get out of here! Get out of here!
He's already said he doesn't think Silence of the Lambs is horror.
It's mainstream horror.
The easiest way for me to kind of talk about it is that horror is kind of like metal. metal has 9 million different subgenres, and horror's kind of gone that same route. You've got your slashers, your paranormal, your exorcism, your ghost. I mean, there's just something for everybody almost in horror, kind of like metal is.
Well, I'm curious too, Mark, to your point, like, this is a completely, like, just different version of Leatherface than we had seen but prior to this, because you have to remember that this reinvention of the character is coming off of the very much hated Next Generation, and just a very goofy, ridiculous version of that character. And so, like, but I mean, like, this is just a brutal take on him. Like, what did you guys feel about, or how did you guys feel about this version of Leatherface?
Well, I can say off of, like, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and as a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was it like New Beginning or something like that?
Next Generation, like, sir.
Next Generation. Is that like mid 90s?
Yeah, 96, I think.
Okay. They fell victim of being low budget B movies that relied on things outside of just creating an interesting atmosphere and a creepy story. And it was just like, we don't have the technology to do the really, scary things, but we're going to keep trying to do that. And it felt like real, like a low point. So I was so happy that it was like, no, this is a monster, just like Jason is a monster, or, Mike Myers is a monster. This is a monster, except for this guy is actually like a real human. And those guys aren't. So I enjoyed this. Like, you want the monster, the scariest monster is the human one, and he kind of embodies both. So I enjoyed that.
I got the impression from the 1974 one that Leatherface had like a learning disability, and like his family was kind of taking advantage of that.
He's more like Sloth from Goonies.
Yeah, that's kind of the way that the. So a few years ago, before he died, the original actor Gunnar Hansen wrote a book called Chainsaw Confidential, and he talks about in that book about how he specifically interpreted it, because like they basically were like, this is what this character does, take your own route with it. And that's kind of where a lot of that stuff comes from.
Okay. Yeah. And then in this one, like we mentioned earlier, he was kind of more of a made fun of child who had like maybe angst and was kind of taking it out in a really unhealthy way. Honestly, I don't prefer one backstory to the other, but I just like that in both cases he isn't a dumb brute that just kills people. There is a meaning below the surface as to why he's doing what he's doing. So I appreciate the writers in both stories having some kind of reasonable story as to why this situation might be occurring.
See, the thing that I like to think of, that I have no idea if it's the intention or not in this version of the movie, is I look at Leatherface as Frankenstein's monster, and the family is Dr. Frankenstein. This boy, even if he was, made fun of and all these things and was bullied and everything, he's not on track to be this. It's the environment in which he grew up at home, because they're the true monsters. Because they're not only, allowing this, they're fostering an environment for this to be the norm in how he is.
Yeah, because in the opening where you first meet the no-legged guy, and they rush in to find the friend, he starts summoning Leatherface as the weapon. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he's kind of created by the family and turned into the weapon of the family.
Yeah. And you don't hear him running up the stairs. Only thing happens is you hear the wall opens and boom, like he's just there.
I remember seeing the commercials for this movie, and one of them was just like flashing screenshots of the different characters, and it goes like black. One of them I saw, it goes black, and you just hear the chainsaw fire up. Mm-hmm. And then it's it just gave you like the date that it was coming out. It was like, that's an effective way to advertise this movie. You hear a chainsaw, and any weirdo that likes horror knows what that's from. No matter where you're at, you hear a chainsaw. Oh, Leatherface.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think the reveal of Leatherface in this is truly terrifying. And I don't know if this is a product of John, what you were talking about, this being nostalgic. Like, this was the Leatherface I grew up on, so this was the Leatherface that like I saw and experienced most as a teenager. So by the time that I actually got to see 74, I was already an adult. And I was kind of a little bit more refined. I think that the Texas Chainsaw 74 does a lot of things a lot better, but as far as like Gunnar Hansen versus this version, for me, this version I think is just kind of an embodiment of brutality, and to Scott's point, like all of like the years of, you know, being bullied, and to John's point, you know, you talk about how environments shape you and mold you into the individual you will be when you become an adult. All of that mental anguish and that mental health is embodied into why he is pursuing people with chainsaws.
That's a good way to put it. Pursuing people with chainsaws. I like that.
There's an interesting scene where he is absolutely the unflinching monster until he gets caught towards the end of the movie. He gets caught in the barbed wire fence chasing after Jessica Biel. He trips through the fence and he cuts his leg with his own chainsaw. Do you remember the sound that he makes when he does that?
Screaming.
He screams like a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the only time that you really get any kind of emotion from him, and it's like it's like, oh no, I got a paper cut as a kid, and you're like, oh, what do I do? I'm scared, I cry, whatever. And it was just in that, and if you don't like, you're just so used to him not being that way, and you realize, oh gosh, like he's not an uncaring thing. He has just been beat down to be this machine. I thought that was it's kind of an interesting point in the movie when you see like the humanity in him, and for just a moment you're like, okay, he's crying, he's gonna go home to mom, she's safe, right? Of course she's not, but you think for a second she might be.
It's the throwing Emperor Palpatine down the well scene of the movie where he shows a little bit of humanity.
Yeah.
But there's one scene in particular, too, that, John, to your point about getting to see a little bit of his humanity, to where we actually do see him as a, like, the family's kind of, like, all talking about him and kind of his learning disability, but you also, at the same time, you get to kind of get a little bit of those, like, whines and, like, childlike emotions kind of come through outside of him just being a brute.
Yeah, that's also one of the best scenes of the movie, when he has her between his legs on the couch and the ma is ironing his pants. Like, to me, like, that feels scarier in some ways being in that room than it is running through the bed sheets with the chainsaw man behind you, because you just feel this, like, they're so nonchalant about this, you don't know how dead you are. And them just having, it was a great way to set up sharing some backstory in a movie that's always running and screaming and damp. It allowed that story thing to happen.
And lots of screaming.
Yeah, lots of screaming.
That was the only thing about both movies. That is the only thing that just pisses me off about both movies, is non-stop screaming. It's like, oh my god. That's one thing that everybody jokes about in horror movies in general, is the screaming damsel. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original and the remake, it's particularly bad in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes, like, when I rewatch it, I don't even notice it, because I'm so, like, I still get my adrenaline's going high, and I'm like, I'm already like, Yeah, I'm feeling that on the inside, so I almost don't hear it on the outside. But when you watch a movie for the first time and it's obnoxiously happening all the time, yeah.
So it's one of those horror movies you watch semi-regularly, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm that way with the Rob Zombie Halloween. That gets pulled out at least once a year.
Well, on that note,
is there like a scale of like, you know, like how many bananas? Like, is it this? We all give a rating scale. This is like 7
How many bananas
out of 10.
all right. We're gonna pull off our Rorschach rating scale. It's been a while since we've done this. All right. Well, 0 to 5, halves being allowed. Scott, where would this movie land for you?
2.5.
2.5. Is that what you said?
5 out of 10.
So it's
a failing
simply
grade,
okay. There's no other horror on. I can deal with it.
Sure. Yeah. It wasn't. I didn't feel like I wasted my time. It wasn't a work of art. It was. I mean, it was a slasher. 100% a slasher. It was not falsely advertised as such. Yeah. You know, right down the middle.
John.
So I assume that Midsummer's a 2 out of 10 then.
Midsummer, for me, is a
what?
10 out of 10.
Jesus Christ.
Did you finally get to watch the director's cut?
No, I have it in a container right over there. I haven't watched it yet, though.
Oh my God. All I'll tell you without ruining it is they can make you hate the boyfriend more.
Oh, great. Okay.
That's all I'm
Great.
going to say.
I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. So you can go halvesies. Midsummer 2 out of 10. 2 out of 5. 2 out of 5. 2 out of 5. It's not a horror movie. Next, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 2003. I give it a 3.5. 3.5 out of 5.
I'm also going to go 3.5 out of 5. Just going to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is I'm kind of on par with John at 3.5 because there's those times when I need a serious, brutal horror movie, and that's one that meets the criteria. Evil Dead remake, the Rob Zombie Halloweens, 31 is awesome if you've never seen that.
Have not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of Rob Zombie's newer movies. It's a bunch of carnies get trapped in a warehouse and
It's weird and wild.
A Hitler midget is trying to kill him at one point. There's chainsaws. There's weirdos. It's awesome. But yeah, I'd give this one a 3.5 as well.
Not if you'd have just described that movie and not told me who made it, I would have said that sounds like a Rob Zombie movie. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a neat movie. It's a bunch of people just trying to survive for Halloween. In like a locked environment with a bunch of rich weirdos betting on it.
Yeah, his life after Halloween, after Haddonfield, is primo. So, Three from Hell's another story. But all right, I think that's gonna land it. That's gonna do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing. Where can people find you guys online? Where can people find the podcast and your respective channels?
Oh, I don't think me and John have ever been on a podcast together where we have to shout it out. You want to go or should I go?
Well, I'll go because I can't hear you.
Okay.
You need to talk like an adult. Use your big brother.
Okay, sorry, Dad. Jeez.
All right, we have a podcast called Trapped Under Plastic. You can find us both on YouTube and anywhere that you listen to podcasts, where we talk about the miniature painting hobby and whatever else we decide to go down in the rabbit hole. My YouTube channel, I have a YouTube channel called just search for Ninjon, where I do mini painting tutorials and various characters, I guess. Scott, what about you?
My channel is Miniac, and so you can go there and find everything from there.
Okay. I was kind of thinking, too, when we had this scheduled, I was like, I didn't line it up, but I think Daryl totally could be in Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, 100%.
Some of his origin story from my youth of watching these kinds of Southern horror movies in the middle of nowhere. Somewhere in there is Daryl was born. So, yeah, that's next.
Daryl would have been a fantastic addition to this.
Yeah. He's a Hewitt. That's his last name, John. There you go. There's a little reference. You can call him
Daryl
Hewitt.
There you go.
Love it.
You heard it here first. Where can people find you online, Mark?
I just have the podcast with you, Victims and Villains and Abyss Gazing, and I have my painting on Titanium Juggernaut Painting on Instagram.
Nice. You guys can follow me. I'm on the Ticker Talks at Gentleman Ghostface. You guys can also follow me on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. Follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, wherever you guys get your podcast from. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. And victimsandvillains.net will get you guys content to more like this, podcasts, movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. So until next time, remember that when you gaze into the abyss gazes back at you. Later, Leather fam.